Ladies and gentlemen, back from maternity leave, but she never really left, Shannon Clark.
That's the best intro. Yes, hello, I'm Shannon Clark, CEO and founder of UserWise, a human factors and clinical evaluation testing consultancy in San Jose, California. And today we're going to be talking about FDA bottlenecks. Why are COVID-19 home tests so scarce? Okay, so today I'm going to be talking through just a lay of the land. What diagnostic tests do we have here in the United States? It's going to be a very US-centric talk. What are some sources of the test kit shortage that we're facing here specifically in the United States? What FDA bottlenecks may be associated with this shortage? And then finally talking through our experience over the past couple of years running a bunch of testing for COVID-19 in vitro diagnostics. So at UserWise, our mission is to co-create safe and usable medical products. And I founded the company in 2014. Since then, we've navigated bringing over 100 globally marketed medical products to market. And historically, we're very focused on human factors testing as well as actual use testing, which I'll speak about later. But our company mission for 2022 is a little bit more specific, but also more broad than 2020 and 2021. Our goal in 2022 is to facilitate widespread access to diagnostic testing in non-clinical settings. So in 2020, our goal was to help with any and all medical products that could help mitigate the pandemic. In 2021, our focus was in vitro diagnostics for COVID-19. And now that we have become a world-class consultancy for diagnostic products, we are looking to really amp this up. And for example, we're working on some products in the AI space where we're empowering lay people to control their own health and seek diagnoses within their home, not having to go anywhere. This is our team. We're in San Jose, California, as I mentioned. And this is our team kind of setting up to do some field work in people's homes for the most part, conducting OTC clinical evaluation studies for COVID-19 diagnostics. You see Shrieker packing his car with all the equipment. If you forget a single item, you're dead in the water. I think we did have one event where we forgot one of the components to one of the products and we had to cancel that portion of the study. One time out of I think 200 sessions that we've run or more. This is our check-in desk, Lauren and Franklin. I'm not sure what they're doing, pretending to check in. And then Alden and Kristen ready to go into someone's home and test, run a study for a COVID-19 diagnostic test.
I might suggest a different title for this slide because you say UserWise team and it looks like they're living out of their cars. So I don't know if that's the image you're looking at. Okay.
Yeah, and also we're a team of 22 human factors engineers and recruitment staff. So this is not the full team, but yeah, this is what we've been up to for the past year. And just a quick background on what are the tests that we're talking about today. There's molecular tests or PCR tests that detect the virus's genetic material. Then there's antigen tests. Most of you would be familiar with the Abbott's Binax Now test kit, where it detects specific proteins on the surface of the virus. And molecular tests tend to be a lot more accurate. So 90 to 96% true positives, where basically there's a 90% chance that you are in fact positive when it tests you to be positive. And with antigen tests, the bar is much lower. So you can have as low as an 80% true positive, or
EPA stands for?
Positive percent agreement.
Thank you.
And so when it's talking about agreement, they're comparing this antigen test result to a PCR test, which is considered the gold standard. So across the board, molecular tests or PCR tests are considered to be quote unquote better than antigen tests. However, antigen tests are more accessible and easier to produce and bring to market.
Can you ever do a molecular test with the kind of turnaround that you can an antigen test?
Yes, I was reading that so there's four tests, PCR tests that are currently authorized for home use in the United States, which is huge. UserWise was heavily involved in Detect's program. They're one of the only four PCR tests that can be used in the home. Detect takes about an hour to use, whereas antigen tests take 15 minutes to 20 minutes to use. So there is a kind of a inherent difference by design, but I was reading that one of the tests, I think it can take less than 20 minutes. I'm really unclear on how that works, or whether that information was accurate, but with molecular tests, you need to usually incubate the specimen and heat it up for a prolonged period of time as it reacts with a reagent. And that's why there's such a long wait period.
Do you anticipate that at some point, perhaps this or next year, we'll get to a place where a home use test will be adequate for travel and national borders and things like that?
I pray. I think it would be so easy. All we need is a telemedicine encounter where someone supervises the use to make sure you're not cheating. The thing is, with molecular tests, you can't really cheat because they're going to have endogenous controls. So that means that it makes sure that human material made it onto the swab. So a molecular test will call you out if you're cheating on the test. So I actually had a friend who was headed to Europe, and he had COVID, and he was saying, like, how do I, get
Wow.
here, right?
And you guys are still friendly?
I'm not gonna get into that, but
Okay.
yeah.
Note to self, do not try to fool Shannon whether or not you have a contagion and still want to be her buddy.
Sure, if you can quote unquote cheat on an antigen test, you just swab for a second, maybe you put it in the nose and you spin it and you don't rub it against your nasal walls, it's going to come up negative because there's no internal control to make sure that it had adequate human sample. So that is one drawback of antigen tests. And what's great about molecular tests is that there's more, it's reliability, that it's not a false negative. So I think that it's ridiculous that we're all still going out and having to get tests before traveling or doing different things and the like. I think it would be so easy to just have, for example, the Detect product in our home. Now, the drawback of that is that it's expensive because you need to buy electronics. It's a small widget that you keep on your coffee table or wherever you want to keep it. You plug it in, and then there's consumables that go into that. So buying the platform, it's kind of like, I really don't know where the pricing stands currently. I think it's somewhere between $100 and $200 probably, but then you just buy the consumables. And I think the reality of this pandemic is that people want to test multiple times throughout a year, and also multiple family members. So it might not be a bad investment, but that's definitely a trade-off.
Yeah, I really hope he jumps on. I just texted Jonathan as well. I don't know, you may not have seen, I posted on LinkedIn a video of me and Jonathan where I got exposed like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he was kind enough to send me some of his product. Okay, go. And
Amazing.
I waited until I was supervised by like the head of the company to do it. So if you have an interest in seeing me pick my nose, that content is available.
I will definitely check that out. And then I'll let you know all the mistakes that you made that we're always monitoring for in our studies.
Well, now I'm intrigued. I may have to call that up. Go on ahead.
Yeah, so what do we have here in the United States at our fingertips? Well, they were very quick to authorize a ton of home sample collection solutions where you collect a sample, put it in a vial, FedEx it to a lab. So that came on the market pretty quickly in 2020, though there is a significant delay with that and you don't get a same day result. So that is a big drawback. And I think quick results are critical to controlling this pandemic. So that's where antigen test kits come in, where they may be less accurate, but at least they're going to give you some information immediately. Oh, what was that?
No, I'm sorry. I have found the video, and in so
Do you want to,
doing,
do you want to play it?
I can. Yeah, I was just getting to the part where I'm actually doing the test. So
Okay,
yeah,
well,
if you don't mind,
yeah, I'll just finish explaining this slide and then
please do.
we'll go. So
Yep, go ahead.
we do have 17 antigen test kits on the market in the United States, which seems pretty good. But to be honest, we didn't have 17 up until very late last year. It was a very kind of sad, pitiful quantity of antigen test kits that were on the market, in my opinion. And then, as I mentioned, there's 4 home use solutions for molecular test kits. A lot of them are currently sold out. So that's all I have to say about that. So,
I think it's going to be interesting to see the advent of a lot of other diagnostic home use tests in light of this new awareness that you can do medical testing at home. I shouldn't even air quote, really.
People are going to expect it now. They've been spoiled. There's no turning back. So I want to be a part of that revolution. I don't like getting in my car and driving to a clinic.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay, I'll share my screen and you let me know if the volume is adequate. I'll make this bigger.
Stopping people who are not infectious from actually moving on.
Can you hear it? Okay.
Yeah.
I did wash my hands. Oops, no, I went ahead and hit the, okay. When you're looking to have people hear, don't hit the mute button, is what I'm finding. Hold on.
Now it's on the floor.
Nothing good is
That's
happening.
okay. It's not necessary for that part to be sterile.
And then I have the swab.
That should be sterile.
Now I'm going to pick my nose in public.
Yes.
I've always wanted to do this, and I wanted it to be socially acceptable. Now, you tell me to go nostril first, when in fact, either nostril can go first. Is that right?
I think it's a matter of preference. So if you prefer the right, go for it.
Well, you know what? I am a righty, and when I pick my nose, I typically.
At this point, you're really waving around that swab. If this were a study, I'd be quite nervous about contaminating the swab.
Interesting.
Complete circles.
Okay, now you told me I'm supposed to do this for 15 seconds. You say to do it 5 times.
5 times.
But you also told me to do it for 15 seconds.
Well, I think you're probably there.
It's not been 15 seconds yet, and I'm enjoying this. Can I do it more than 5 times?
Yeah.
Okay, 15 seconds. Nailed it.
Trying to get you're trying to get that in, that material, you know, and hopefully you don't have anything.
Ladies and gentlemen.
And now you've got to do the other nostril.
I'm going to do the other nostril now for another 15 seconds of.
And you're allowed to use your right hand.
And I'm going to do this face for my son. If he really thinks this is a funny look.
Nice technique getting those walls of the nostril.
Thanks.
Place the swab into the.
You guys hear
Oh,
that?
wait.
So I'm going to.
Wait, what kind of sad little swab was that? I think you did it for what, 3 seconds?
This was like a 30-minute video.
There was like a little bubble there. Liquid in there.
Yeah, there's liquid in there. And so what you want to do is just agitate it. And you can, the material of the vial is a little bit placid. So you can squeeze it and actually like, almost like a squeegee, you know, like squeeze off the
swab. Is that good to get more of the stuff off the swab kind of thing?
That's right. That's the general idea.
And I'm going to remove this. This is now garbage.
Yes.
And I am to put
that famous little cap on top.
I see this as a public
Just so
service
that you can
announcement.
Apply 3 drop onto the cassette.
with your finger, mix thoroughly. Invert extraction vial and hold the sample vertically.
That little well, exactly, and you're going to put 3 drops in there.
3 drops and no more.
Right.
You might put that in your instructions too, because the overzealots might want to really. I'm an overachiever, you know that though. It looks like I might. I mean, I know it's a 10-minute thing, but it says if the C has any visibility, that I'm not doing so well.
No, so the C is the control. So that's an internal control that ensures that the test was actually performing as it should.
Mhm.
And what you're looking for is a line at the T level. And it could be very faint, it could be very bright, depending on the amount of material that's found in your nostrils. But you're looking for a line at the T level. If you do, then you are diagnosed positive.
I'm not seeing any T anything.
No, you're not showing signs of infection.
So the punchline is Joey was not infected.
So at that point, had you already dropped the drops in and then you were holding it up to the camera?
I mean, my test was completely supervised by a professional, and yes, I did it properly. I just made cuts so that it was tolerable.
Oh, I see. Okay, so I couldn't tell that you were like fast forwarding. I was like,
was
whoa,
so
whoa.
amazing. I know. Right. Here in the UK, where we have that socialist National Health Service, we have had completely free home antigen tests for about 18 months at this point.
And I heard it was like 7 per person, and you just ask for it and you get it immediately. Maybe I also heard that someone will even bring it to your door in the UK in some circumstances.
But if the party leaders are having outdoor get-togethers and such while everyone else is in the house, that's a big, not worth the socialism.
Nick. Yeah, so shall I share my screen again?
Yes, please do. You can see that folks are getting a little
This is
restless.
gonna get heated.
Having political conversation in the middle of your home use test.
Okay, well, thanks for that overview of how these things go. Just need to move this bar. Okay. So as you can see, there's been a pretty good steady flow of self-testing with some home use PCR results. These stars represent when the FDA finally authorized more molecular tests or PCR tests where you could get the result in your home.
This is a confusing slide. You might want to label it differently, or at least put what the star means in the legend.
Ah, yes, will do. The focus of my talk today is antigen test kits. And as you can see, this is sort of the pandemic and prevalence of COVID in the United States over time in the background here. And then how many antigen test kits were authorized by the FDA over time. They got a lot of pressure or sort of shifted gears in Q4. And it was timely, however, not early enough, because to authorize a test kit in October, November, December of 2021, these test kits aren't actually going to enter into the market. It's not like these companies have 100,000 there on the manufacturing line ready to ship out. They actually get the authorization, and then they may or may not be poised to actually sell the product. So, I mean, I would give it about 3 months to actually ramp up production and sell it. So these 6 authorizations actually came too late, in my opinion, for the surge that you see there.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a test kit shortage? Well, Biden acknowledged that there was, at least in December 22. Biden noted that he wished he would have thought about ordering 500,000 test kits 2 months ago or more before COVID, which he's talking about Omicron got here.
Mm-hmm.
So he's really kicking himself. So why is there a shortage? Here's some ideas. Well, maybe we could blame it on Biden and the federal government for not adequately stockpiling these test kits.
What was on the previous slide? He regrets having not ordered how many?
500,000.
We have a population of 300+ million. What? Right?
I'm not sure.
I'm off by a factor of many, many times. I don't understand, but go on.
Also, by the way, the ... he kept saying pills for some reason. So, but he was talking about test kits, but he kept reverting back. I don't know if you saw that clip.
Mickey is going to just keep going.
Okay. So why are we having a shortage? Okay, forecasting issues. Also, should we blame the producers? Forecasting by the producers? They didn't expect a surge. That's true. But what's interesting is that the Binax now accounts for 75% of all the US retail sales of antigen test kits. And sure enough, they weren't authorized until March of 2021. And by August, they were shuttering their factories. August 22, this article, there's layoffs. They even purged supplies. They basically shut down everything in August, and that's within months of getting their authorization. So Abbott with the Binax now, they were not poised to handle this surge caused by Omicron. But I just question, why did they have a stronghold on 75% of US retail sales? That's crazy to me.
There's no competition.
Exactly. And then other sources of the shortage, government grants, for example, BARDA, where they invest in medical device R&D. The way that some of these grants are structured is that they won't pay for the testing itself. And in order to complete all the FDA required testing, it's between $3 million and $10 million. So who's going to pay for that? I think these government grants in some cases have been going to really flashy, novel solutions instead of addressing like, what do we have here and now that we could use and scale up with respect to manufacturing, and government grants weren't really helping a lot. So you could maybe blame that. You could also blame private investors. I think early on, however, in the pandemic, these private investors got pretty burned. And when the pandemic started, everyone was really excited about the idea of emergency use authorizations, this idea that you could have a shortcut to market. It attracted a lot of people who maybe haven't invested in medical products before, or even those in this space. They thought, oh, well, there's a reduced burden of testing. This should be easier and quicker to bring to market and less burden to the investors to pay for this process. In fact, this is directly from the FDA guidance on emergency use authorizations. They're basically saying that those items in yellow, you don't necessarily have to do these traditionally important medical product activities. For example, they're saying you don't really need to do record keeping by persons other than the product manufacturers. So does that mean that, like, user-wise, when we get hired by a manufacturer, does it mean that we don't need to adhere to good documentation practices or record keeping? Also, if you look down to the third to last item, it says that you may not need to follow good manufacturing practices, or you don't need to do data collection and analysis concerning product safety and effectiveness. So this is very appealing to me as an investor. If I'm going to invest in a medical technology and I'm not required to do data collection and analysis in advance of bringing it to market, that's pretty appealing. So I think there was a gold rush that happened in mid-2020. But then once the investors invested, a lot of them got burned, and because it turned out the FDA requirements were actually heightened for these in vitro diagnostics. So we can blame private investors, but I think a lot of them got spooked early on. And then finally, I would blame a widespread black market of tests. So I think we had this false sense of, oh, there are tests. And I saw a lot of people around me using these black market tests. Even the California State Assembly purchased mass amounts of saliva home collection antigen tests for the assembly members to decide whether they should go drive to Sacramento and join the assembly during the pandemic. And these were interestingly not FDA authorized at all. So I was really kind of interested how the government ended up purchasing black market tests. So everyone was sort of relying on these black market tests because there's so few actual authorized tests available. And then once we saw this shift into Omicron and late last year, where employers started purchasing tests, employers are going to be a little bit more savvy usually and making sure that they're FDA authorized if they're doing huge deals. For example, Apple pays for any employees coming on site to take these Binax Now tests once per week. So a major purchase by an employer like that, they're going to make sure it's authorized. And then with all these black market tests, there just isn't enough to buy. So we could blame all of these sources for the shortage, but I think there's a dotted line that always heads back to that FDA bottleneck. Why are there only 17 that are authorized? And I thought this was a really interesting comment from Dr. Michael Mina from the LA Times. He was criticizing the fact that in these over-the-counter clinical evaluations for antigen test kits, you always have to compare your antigen test kit result to PCR. And those are completely different sort of mechanisms of action in a way, where PCR is looking for genetic material, antigen is looking for presence of viral load, basically. So the antigen test is only going to be positive for like those 5 days when you're most infectious. But the FDA is asking us to compare those antigen tests to PCR tests where they can test positive for weeks and weeks. And so this in and of itself will bar a lot of antigen tests from entering the market if they're not structuring their clinical evaluations properly. And it does take some learnings. And what I have seen is those that are developing antigen test kits, trying to bring them to market, most of which are on market in many other countries right now, and they're just trying to bring these established products into the United States. What I've seen is that they'll fail their clinical study, for example, run by a competitor of UserWise, and then have to redo the whole study with UserWise. That sort of thing will result due to this mathematical impossibility if you don't structure your clinical study in exactly the right way.
I'd like you to stay on this slide a bit because I think this probably talks squarely at what you do for a living. I mean, I could look at this and look at mathematical impossibility. I hear you talking. It's like, okay, you really have to structure it properly, but break it down for us a little bit in layman's terms. So I have a PCR test. I want to get it to market. I come to you, and there are ways to set up a test so you get some kind of result versus another kind of result, and FDA is looking for this or that. And I'm using these pronouns because I don't know what I'm talking about. Can you help put it in language that, okay, you know, one of your competitors, a far less ethical, good firm that we don't like, gets the business, they set it up how to kind of skew things, and then, well, that wasn't good enough, we really have to go and do it properly the way you would. Can you help me understand practically what I would do in that scenario?
Yes, fundamentally what UserWise does is we're experts in behavioral studies. So if you have a traditional clinical CRO who's an expert in running clinical trials, they're gonna crank this out like a machine, maybe. I don't think any more efficiently than us, but they don't understand the idea that the FDA is actually asking us to have lay people use these products in a naturalistic manner. So there's a lot of restrictions about you're absolutely not allowed to train these lay people before they use the product, because in real life, are they going to get training? No. You can't guide them or correct them at any point. And if you do correct them or guide them at some point, you need to do it in a very specific manner and report on it in a very specific manner. And I think that that is what you're getting at, Joe, about kind of how this clinical study can be run incorrectly versus correctly. But to be honest, I think there's just not a lot of evidence. The FDA has difficulty enforcing their requirements there because they aren't necessarily going to request all the video footage, and a lot of these CROs are not collecting video footage. So it's sort of, this will never even come up in your FDA.
Imagine how maybe there's an AI kind of way of doing it, but just as I showed you video evidence of me taking a test, you were like, wait a minute, you what? If I had done it the way I did it, it would have taken twice as long for me. How many of those 20, 30-minute videos can a human watch and be like, okay, this is a fair representative sample, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, so the FDA isn't going to, we've never had the FDA audit any of our videos in the past 8 years of operation.
Right, so that's why so few actually collect it.
But what we do is, well, also the videos are so helpful for root cause analysis. In the case that there is a failure, we can go back and collect more data. It's been very powerful actually for our
Sorry,
discrete
I told you I'm
analysis.
house sitting for a cat and midnight needed to come in.
No worries. So, yeah, I think, but another signal is the script. So I have had the FDA audit our scripts, where we have basically our lines. It's like writing a play each time we're designing this study, and we say and do the exact same thing at the exact same moment for every single participant that comes in. So the script is evidence of what we said and did each step. And I think it would really shine through that we're not biasing the participants in any way. But also what I have seen that has caused these studies to fail is, for example, using the wrong PCR test comparator, because the FDA only allows a very limited number of PCR tests. You can't just use any authorized PCR that's on the market in the United States. You have to use a very specific subset of them, and you have to hire a very specific lab that has access to that PCR test, which is logistically challenging. And what's crazy is that you can run an entire, $500,000 clinical study and get to the end of it. If you didn't get the FDA's buy-in on this PCR test, it's all, garbage results, and there's nothing you can do about it because none of the samples exist anymore. Yeah.
Can you hear her?
Yeah.
She's really loud. She's looking for her food, excuse me, which I put up here because her brother, Simon, likes to eat her food. So I have to kind of keep them separate. I didn't know it was going to be such a big job. I just kind of, does anyone on the call have something they're working on that requires user testing? If so, raise your hand, because we've got an expert in that kind of thing here. Bobby and Sue and Jan, everyone wants to talk. Here come our friends. Hi, Bobby.
Sure. Yes, I actually have a company that is in the process of delivering the documentation for a molecular test. And so one of the things that I brought up is you don't have a usability protocol yet. And they said we're developing one, but I've heard that story at least 100 times. And then when we get something that's 1 page long and doesn't meet any requirements of anything, so that might be something that I need to follow up with you later on, because they're gonna want somebody that has experience on it doing those. But is there any usually the first questions I get is, how long is this going to take, and how much money is it going to cost, and what do we have to have in order to do this test? So maybe you could help us with those 3 questions.
Sure. Yeah, I always say 4 months, because it takes 1 to 2 months to recruit participants for a human factor study, typically. But in the case of an OTC study for in vitro diagnostic, it's actually really fast to recruit these lay people, because you don't need COVID positives. As long as you're not combining your clinical evaluation with your human factors evaluation, you can just test any lay people. And the only requirements are that 30 of the individuals between your clinical and human factor study must be children, just to show that children can safely be swabbed. So it takes about 4 months. Now the FDA, well, I guess for molecular and antigen tests, though, I would say it could be as short as 2.5, 3 months, I guess, because you need to run the study, and then reporting and verifying the data does take some time. So it is pretty labor intensive. With respect to cost, it used to cost $500,000 before the FDA reduced their requirements in October of 2021. It used to require over 100 participants for the human factors study. They even alluded to needing to run it in Spanish, which augments, I have to resource the study with Spanish speakers and translate all of our documentation into Spanish. That's just a major barrier. But I actually presented to the FDA, I shared information. I've been pushing for them to change the template for years now, and they finally did. And I sent them this kind of like final presentation in July 22, 2021. And then within 2 months, they changed all of them. So I don't know if I had anything to do with that, but it is something that I was screaming for a while. And now they've reduced the burden significantly, which is so great. You can also present justifications that your antigen test kit is equivalent to those on the market, which is a very traditional human factors approach for many products. And that is just so powerful for these Me Too antigen tests, getting those on the market.
You had said previously it was 500,000 for these tests, and they had 100 users that you had to go through?
Yeah, so now you should expect 150,000.
Okay, and how many users now? 30?
Yes, 30 users.
Okay. But you said the number of children has to be 30.
Between the two studies.
Clinical and your usability study, is that correct?
Yeah. So you could do 15 and 15, or you could do a 100% human factor study with just children. I think that the FDA should be flexible about that.
According to Shannon Clark, she thinks you should be flexible.
Yeah.
And no more Spanish speaking requirements?
What was that?
No more Spanish speaking requirements?
Yeah, that's definitely donezo. That was really annoying. And actually our clients never did it. We've justified the whole pandemic to not pursue Spanish speaking instructions. And we've had success, thank goodness.
Wow, you are persuasive. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I thank Shannon. She's one of the sponsors for 10X, so you can see her up close and in person. And she'll be able to have breakfast or lunch with you and talk about your project in particular. Ms. Carr, you were next.
We're actually conducting formative human factor study tests next week. We have a pilot study going on today. It cost, I want to say, close to $300,000. But we're being funded by, our licensing partners. So, wish me luck on that. I think it's a medical device. It's not an antigen test, nothing directly to do with COVID. I think indirectly, we developed a all-in-one filter device for filtering ampule-based medication that's cost-effective, safer, quicker, and easier, more compliant. So we're using about, I think 14 people for our test next week. Half will be pharmacy personnel and half will be nursing personnel. So I'm kind of in that space, but in a different place. But it's exciting and scary at the same time.
So I understand you to say that after 14 users, you have concluded with the firm you're using that will be adequate evidence?
For a formative study, yeah, they only require, I think, 20 users. So anywhere from 17, might be 17 users, anywhere from 17 to 20, you can get adequate results for about 80%, 80 or 90% results are sufficient.
It seems, I don't know what I'm talking about. We've established this. It just seems like a really low number to me, Shannon.
It does, but they showed me the stats and it's okay with FDA. So
It is, yeah. In fact, the FDA doesn't even require formative testing. There are no hard requirements, but what they're referencing is HE 75 that says that you should have 5 users per user group in your formative studies. Because if you have less than 5, you're just not going to see the diversity that you would expect. So you also need to just consider where you're recruiting from. Are they all physicians or nurses that work at Stanford, we always take care to recruit from a variety of institutions, so we get that variety of perspectives.
Yeah, we're getting a variety from, actually it's going to be conducted in North Carolina and also virtually over in EU. So it's gonna be virtual and it's gonna be digital, so it animated. It's gonna be kind of tricky. So they're gonna rely on the results from the US. And there will be they're taking people from Duke University, from the VA hospital, and an oncology infusion center and a compounding. So there will be a variety of different, and it'll be pharmacy and pharmacy techs, pharmacists and pharmacy techs, and nurse practitioners. So hopefully we'll get that variety, what we need. And that will give us a lot of insight on what we need to do to improve for our summative study.
For your consideration, and I don't know if this would help you, Sue, or Shannon, or our viewers, you will have video capture for all this stuff. Maybe there's a way to, when it's appropriate, there's no compromise to your IP or anything like that, that we could share it with the group about how it worked, what went right, wrong, what you look for in a formative study. And frankly, Shannon, if you wouldn't mind, help me understand. I understand the broad category. We need to have people test the thing. What's a formative study?
It's an early stage informative study to iterate the design and the instructions. So the whole premise is that you're going to be making changes after you do this study, or if you're closer to that final production quality product, it could be sort of a final check before you go into the FDA grade human factors validation testing. And the FDA doesn't have a regulation that says you must do formative testing, but it's just commonly accepted among industry that if you don't do the early stage testing, you're not going to pass the final FDA compliant human factors validation testing.
Is the likely edits, if any, after formative just changes to your IFU, or might you have to redesign your prototype?
It depends on where you are in your design phases, but it sounds like this formative study that we're discussing is quite formal, a formal end-to-end kind of check on the product. And I don't know, Sue, how open is your team to making changes to the design of the product itself at this point?
Yeah, well, that's what we're discussing now. So we have to be quite open, and hopefully we won't go back to square one, because it's taken us a little over a year to get to this point. But there are some questions that we have, and there's some modifications from my original alpha prototype. So they're basically just going to be given it and without any instruction, and they're going to have to figure out how to use it. So that will help us in modifying our design moving forward. And we're discussing modifications, so we have to be open to that.
I'm not the best at reading people, but I do get a sense of, oh, for God's sakes, this is a startup, and please just let it go fine. I just can't handle none of the other changes.
You're right.
Okay.
But we've already discussed some changes that we'd like to make, but these studies will tell us, do we have to make these changes?
Mm-hmm. Rob, you came back on presumably to comment on what Sue just said.
We were talking about the formative studies, and Shannon said, most companies will do this no matter what to make sure that the summative studies go successfully. The things that I've seen change most from formative to summative have been the instruction for use. They find some things that weren't clear that they swore were clear.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the changes we've seen. We've actually seen redesigns of product. We've also seen changes to the protocol. And most of the clients expect, oh, we're just going to change the protocol. And they never expect the instructions are going to need to change. And they never expect to see the design change. Mm-hmm. Have you seen some other changes, Shannon, that from formative to summative, because you've done 200 and I've done like 5.
Yeah, the only other change that you haven't mentioned, I mean, there's infinite changes, like changes to the use-related risk analysis and all documentation that is associated with this product. But the other thing to iterate is training. So if there is always training provided, and you're allowed to include that within your human factors validation, which most of the time we don't simulate training because we want to simulate worst case. We have iterated training programs. So instructions, design of the product itself. I guess I could also separately mention packaging and user comprehension of the packaging itself. For over-the-counter products, it becomes really important because there's self-selection tasks. If you're going to be selling an over-the-counter product on the shelves of CVS, you need to make sure that the correct people are going to be buying it.
You used the word packaging. I think Jan Gates, and I recall that Jan raised her hand earlier just to comment that she's always recommending you. So,
thank you so much, Jan.
and I'm thinking about how, as someone who does communication for a living, how incremental IFU videos would be for people to follow. And it could have different, if it's on YouTube, you can even select sometimes what captions, subtitles you want for other tongues. But, I had some fun with Jonathan. You saw, I started by saying, now you say that I should swab my right nostril first, when in fact, either will do. And he says, yes, it's your preference. Silly, but that was a choice in an IFU. Do the right nostril first. I remember there was another thing or two that I had to say, like, I could interpret this two ways. I just wonder, I know that IFU writing is a skill and there are professionals who do that. I just wonder sometimes if there aren't other perspectives that would be helpful to be like, you could read that two ways kind of thing. I don't know. It's tricky, not to mention how well people actually choose to read the instructions to begin with, probably more diagrams and such, but I don't know. I'm outside my area of expertise. Ms. Friedman has many areas of expertise.
Well, actually, just a few, but I do have a question, and I apologize for not being able to follow the whole conversation, Shannon, but it's interesting that they've gone, I guess, is this just for the COVID testing down to the $150,000 testing piece? Is that only for COVID, or is that for other types of class 1 exempt products, for instance, which is what I have?
Yeah, so that, I think that quote was for like a human factors validation study for a 15 user, human factors validation study. So a clinical study would be more, or if you have more user groups, it would be more, or if you have a surgical robot that takes 4 hours to use, that would be more, or if you have surgeons involved, like it's sort of like a baseline, lay people, 1 hour sessions, all back to back, not a rare disease. I'd say that's sort of a line in the sand that I draw.
Okay, all right, so that is helpful. So we're about to start performance improvement initiatives inside active major hospitals to get some user feedback from the user, who happens to be a nurse. So that's actually ongoing, but the whole UX experience is something that is integral to what I'm doing. So I think I'll probably reach out to you offline.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. It sounds like an electronic health record though, no? What, it's not?
It's not electronic at all. It's a piece of plastic that's replacing a piece of tape.
To say, Elizabeth, I think of all premium members I've ever had, no one has used the network as extensively as you.
It's been fantastic and fabulous.
How many folks have you used now?
I can't count on all these hands. Probably, yeah. So Jan and Nick, let's see. Now I've had lots of other contacts indirectly. I guess about 6 different people. Yeah, so it's been really fantastic. And I'm in San Antonio, Texas. I spend a lot of my time in Austin, Texas, which is where our product is manufactured right now at this time. But our friends at the FDA actually had to make a new product code for our product because it doesn't exist anywhere right now.
I like the sound of no competition.
So, well, not yet, but we're preparing for
I
it.
don't
But the
like the
point
sound
is,
of nobody knows what the hell it is.
And
that's
it's
okay,
class
that's
one.
class 1 exempt, yeah.
So I think most likely you will not be required to do human factors validation testing at all. So any usability testing that you do is just for the business, not for FDA purposes.
Correct, yeah. But I am very conscious about the whole user experience, and that's important to me just from the business standpoint.
And from a marketer's point of view, I love hearing.
Absolutely, if that's
I
what
know,
it is.
right?
So yeah. So anyway, so thank you. Great to see you again. I've heard your other presentation, but Joe, your program is really fantastic.
Go on. When
Yeah.
you say fantastic, what exactly do you mean?
That means it's connects us all over the world together. And I look forward to sharing our product when we're able to really share it in full blown, and MDG will be the first place to go.
I thank you. And I'm glad that most of the folks that you have been working with will meet you in person in May.
Here we go, in May.
There we go.
Yes.
Okay. Now,
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Shannon, we diverged, but appropriately, to handle some audience situations and questions. Were there other things? I've long since removed your slides from being shared. Are there other slides in the deck that you'd like to close with as we approach the top of the hour?
I think what I'll conclude with
keeping in mind we cannot see your
photos. I just want to share some quick pictures of like our experience running OTC clinical evaluations. Are you able to see?
Yes.
So basically these projects are very challenging, very somewhat different from traditional human factor studies or even actual use human factor studies. And recruiting the COVID population just has been crazy. It's like storm chasers. So we have someone in our lab, as you can see here, interacting with a product in a controlled environment. And that's typically what we do. But here's what we do for COVID testing, mobile COVID testing. We're basically chasing the pandemic, conducting testing in an RV.
Pandemic chasers.
Exactly. So we've literally been just storm chasing for the pandemic to get these participants for these clinical studies. And this is sort of what it looks like. We're out in the field, dressed up in garb. Here we have a practitioner who's like bent over trying to see the swabbing occur with this child, and it's very real environments, just really kind of raw situations where you have someone who's very, very sick and they're kind enough to allow you to come into their house and have them use this product. So it's not for the faint of heart, and this is sort of what the real life looks like of conducting these studies.
Yeah,
So
I wouldn't put that in your recruitment video.
What? Oh, recruitment of employees?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that's of course you're in the recruitment.
I want people who are tough and want to contribute to this pandemic, and everyone on my team has been all for it.
Fair enough. Is there anything that you might like to add, or perhaps I'd say, is there another aspect of what you guys do at UserWise that we really didn't talk about at all? Just kind of a 30-second commercial of other reasons to call you besides delightful conversation.
Sure. Well, we're experts in user testing in the medical space, whether that's drug delivery devices, diagnostics. We have vast experience in robotic surgery. We're working with basically every client that exists related to robotic surgery. So we offer sort of like 4 things at a high level. So we'll do usability testing and consulting services related to human factors and usability. We have an IRB in-house that is separate from our practitioners. So we can get our ethical approval of each protocol. We have a market research facility where we can simulate an operating room as well as a home use environment, as well as a reprocessing center. So we can simulate these high fidelity environments for testing. And then most of all, or most importantly, maybe, is our recruitment branch. We have dedicated staff for recruiting and finding difficult to find participants. And that has been tremendous for helping progress these COVID clinical evaluations. So that team has expertise in outreach and just breaking through to find these participants for the studies. And at first, I didn't want to get into that business of recruitment, and we were relying on vendors, but the vendors were so awful that we had to bring it in-house in order to do our job. So that's kind of where we are today.
Thank you. I really appreciate this hour. Next week, we have a very different topic. It's going to be mind expanding about the realm of the possible. John's talk is entitled The Only Sustainable Edge. So for you folks interested in strategy and getting your product to market and the like, I think that'll be a really important one. Ms. Clark, thank you very much. And we'll see you all next week. Bye, everyone.